This morning, joining me is Mrs. Petal. Benoit, no stranger to us, of course. If you don't know her, then you need to get, I don't know, something, because you have to know who your representatives are, who sits in the Tobago House of Assembly, and who, of course, represent the causes of the people on the island. Ms. Petal Benoit is, of course, a minority councillor of the Tobago House of Assembly. Good morning.
Good morning, Natalie. Good morning, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and wherever you are tuned in to Tobago Updates this morning. A pleasant good morning. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And it's always a pleasure to have you as well. I know how busy your schedule can be, yet, you always take the time out to sit and talk with me, and of course, to let people know what's happening and make your representation. This morning, I want us to start our conversation looking at central government. We know that they recently completed their first 100 days in office as a newly, if we can say, we can say new still, it's just 100 days, just over about 3 months. And everyone, you're seeing all the different public figures, professionals, analyzing what has taken place so far. We have seen coming out of central government, the Prime Minister as well, talking about what may have been accomplished, what they need to do. And it would be interesting to hear, what's your take on what has happened so far. And, let's look at if there were positives, negatives. So let's have that discussion this morning.
Thank you again, Natalie. So August 9th actually was the mark of the 100 days since the UNC has been in office. And what we would have recognized, and I want to speak to the 100 days based on the words of the UNC while they were on the campaign trail, as well as some comments made by the Prime Minister while she was being sworn in. So the UNC's slogan was, when UNC wins, everybody wins. And then when the Prime Minister was sworn in, I think that was on May 1st, her words were, 6 months from today, under the new UNC government, you will be in a safer and a happier place in Trinidad and Tobago. And very soon after the UNC came into power, we heard about the CPEP contractors and employees. I think it was about 1,000, approximately 1,000 of them were placed on the breadline. Then you would have heard about the 4,000 forestry workers. And across the ministries and state agencies at the central government level, you continue to hear about firings and dismissals. You would have heard about the central bank governor. I think he has a lawsuit now. And most recently, we are hearing about the CEO of the First Citizens group of companies. And if we are to judge on the words of the UNC and the Prime Minister, when UNC wins, everybody wins, and after they are in power, Trinidad and Tobago will be a safer, happier place, I don't think the thousands of CPEP workers and all the workers that were placed on the breadline is in a happier place today. Because one, they have lost their jobs. They have lost their incomes. We are going into a period where this is a new school term. So, of course, the expenses associated with that. We would have heard on the news, one person who lost a job would have committed suicide or something like that. And that is not a happier place to be. So, in that regard, I will not give a favorable report on this new administration in terms of the UNC. We also had a lot of controversial issues in terms of the SOE. We now have an SOE. Before, when the SOE was under the People's National Movement government, the current Prime Minister would have had lots to say about the crime fighting strategy introducing an SOE. And very soon after coming into office, an SOE was declared. We would have had ministers. I think it was reported on the Daily News that there were 3 ministers who is now currently under threat for their lives. And that is not a safer, happier Trinidad and Tobago. And again, based on those promises, we have not seen that come to fruition.
But do you think, I mean, the Prime Minister did say in 6 months, and we're just about halfway through the mark, do you think it's fair, and it doesn't matter which political party is sitting at central government head, but do you think it's really fair to judge, to make that judgment whether they are doing well or not in just 100 days?
Well, yes, because we are commenting on the 100 days so far and what we have seen, and I'm demonstrating, or I'm sharing what has been happening. And based on their actions immediately after coming into office, persons are placed on the breadlines, persons are suffering, and persons aren't happier. And, you know, I want to share my own experience because I worked at the solid waste swim call while I was in Trinidad, and this was the first term under the Kamala Persad-Bissessar UNC government. That was 2010 to 2015. I was employed at Swimcall, and shortly after that government came into office, I was also placed on the breadline. I was an accounting officer. I would have submitted my resume, went to interviews. I was duly employed with the organization. Myself, along with several other employees, came to work one day and was told that you are no longer employed. At that time, I was a permanent employee. So I could totally understand, you know, living in Trinidad, having to pay rent, having to
having to live, right?
Having to live, you know, and one Friday, just being advised without any prior notice that you are no longer employed. So the group of us would have come together, we would have gone to a union, and they would have represented us. It took a while for some settlements to happen, but it happened over a number of years. So I could totally relate and understand with persons who, on the advent of a new government, and in particular the UNC, would have been placed on the breadline. So I feel the pain, I understand the hurt, I understand the frustration, because you could never feel it or empathize truly until you have really faced the brunt of that. So in that regard, again, we are judging them based on the actions, and the actions have not been positive to a number of persons.
And but is it something, and again, we're just talking about politics in Trinidad and Tobago, and for those of us who pay attention to what's going on, every time we have a political change in government, you often see a lot of people being sent home for whatever reason. Of course, some may have been political hires, or some may have been just wrongfully dismissed, as you would have shared in your case. Is this something we need to get used to? Because it happens. This is not the first time it's happening. It has happened with other, you know, parties taking the reign. So is this something we should just, you know, say? And of course, you always hear, no matter what, it's PNM, UNC coming out of the dismissals, you would hear, well, things were not done properly, contracts are not in place, we're sending you home because we have to restructure your programs, you know. We saw it here too in Tobago, I think with TADCO, when there was a change as well, and you heard coming out of the office that, you know, there were contracts, subordinates getting paid higher than supervisors and issues like that. So do you think it's fair anytime, whether it's PNM, UNC, or government taking charge, and we have this upset, that it's totally fair to just say, you know, you shouldn't do it, it's not good?
No, what we understand is that there are changes in policy. And, you know, you would understand as citizens that new policy directives will have implications. In the past, particularly under the PNM government, you would see where boards may have changed. But to go to the granular level in terms of staff, clerical workers, I have not experienced that in the past. And if you go back to the restructuring in terms of TADCO, there were 3 or 4 companies merged under the PNM in the Tobago House of Assembly. We had Tico Suave, I think we had the Fishing Company, and there were 2 other companies that were merged into TADCO. And with that restructuring, nobody was placed on the breadline, nobody was sent home. And I think there are ways that you could address those issues without placing people on the breadline. I also don't think it is something that we should grow accustomed. We should never grow accustomed to, if a new government comes in power, then, you know, you have to be wondering whether or not you're employed. And if it is wrong in one administration, wrong is wrong and right is right. And you can't condemn it with one administration and then condone it with another. And again, I also feel that there are ways and means of doing things without disenfranchising the employee. So I don't think it's something that, you know, the population or people in general should get accustomed to.
And very recently, this week, coming out of the news, we see the topic of gated communities as a crime strategy. What's your take on that? If you have had the time to look at and hear what's coming out of that ministry.
Well, in terms of crime strategies, not everyone can afford living in a gated community. So if you are saying that that is a major strategy, what happened to, or what happens to the persons who are unable to afford to live in a gated community? Is it that their lives are lesser than someone who could afford it? So I think we need to really think through the crime fighting strategies. And again, that was one of the promises that was made on the campaign trail, that, you know, we will be able to find crime in a more strategic way. We also had, in the recent past, the Prime Minister speaking about having a panic button. How many families would be able to install a panic button in their homes? And in terms of responses, we are hearing about the number of officers, the number of vehicles. What will be the response time to those panic presses, so to speak? So again, crime fighting is not something that should be politicized. And crime, we have to look at the granular level. It can be seen as well as a social issues. What are the things that are in place to reduce or alleviate crime? What is the, and again, I go back to the whole issue of placing people on the breadline. Could placing people on the breadline account for an increase in crime and criminal activity? If I have nothing to feed my children, if I do not have the means and the wherewithal to purchase my books and what is required for my children to return to school, I may or may not resolve to a life of crime and criminal activity. So again, we have to look at what is the root cause and prescribe things that can deal with the root causes. We also speak to the Ministry of Youth and the Ministry of Youth, and there was an entire ministry dealing with youth and national service, and we would have seen young people being engaged in agriculture and in a whole suite of productive things. We are hearing now that that may be in jeopardy of not existing
anymore as it is.
And you know, youths were in productive, constructive things. If that is no longer existing, what is going to happen to the young people who were previously engaged in those programs? And they will become idle, and the elements may take them up into a life of crime and criminal activity. So I think it's a holistic view, and we have to plan for crime and plan for the productivity of our people.
And, you know, of course, we live in a society, I think the world as people, our human nature is to always look at the negatives. But sitting in their first 100 days of office, we would have also seen the demerit system would have been removed from most of the, what we may call the lighter tickets. And a lot of people were happy about that, you know. The Children's Life Fund, I saw some expansion taking place as well. So though the media may highlight the negatives, because even the Children's Fund, like for me, when I read that story, it was just like in passing. And I'm like, I wonder how many persons would have seen this. And of course, I'm waiting as well to see how it develops and what really comes out of it.
No, and I would commend, because we continue to say as a minority, we will not oppose for opposing's sake. But, you know, when the need arises, we will bring the issues to fore. And when there's something to congratulate or commend, we will commend. So in terms of the Children's Life Fund, I think that was a good initiative where persons who are not able to afford, life-saving surgeries for their children or their loved ones can benefit from a fund like that. So that is a good initiative. It just has to be managed properly. And, proper accountability and transparency. So the good works of that initiative is not tarnished by how it is managed. So,
and even with the demerit system, because that's causing quite a stir. And I saw people were so disappointed because, of course, the demerits remained on what in my own terms, the heavier, the heavier ticketing areas. So if you were found, which is driving while drunk or intoxicated, the points remain there. And I'm like, people just wanted the entire thing scrapped, but you must have consequences for
actions.
your actions.
And I agree with that. and particularly, I think there's the demerit points is a two-edged sword. Because, of course, you hear the positives in terms of persons indicating that it was a burden. However, you also hear the other side of that story where we have seen an increase in fatal accidents, very tragic accidents, and some persons are accounting that for the removal of the demerit points. So I guess it's something that, we really need to look at and determine, the pros versus the cons and whether or not. So I think for that is a two-edged sword. So you could see it on both sides. There are disadvantages as well as there may be advantages for some persons who would have paid a heavy penalty in relation to their offenses under that act.
And of course, we're getting ready to go for a quick break. And when we come back, we continue to talk a little bit about that. And of course, we'll talk about independence, because I know it's something that is, for our history, for who we are, celebrating a nation's independence. It's something that's powerful. It runs deep. And countries have particular ways of celebrating. And one of the things we look forward to is our parade, the fireworks, that social activity, seeing our protective services out there looking all smart. But so after the break, we'll talk a little about that as well. And of course, as we go to our break, I just want to share with you that Books and Office Supplies at TLH Plaza, they are waiting for you so that you can get all your back to school needs, from backpacks and stationery to textbooks and the Tobago's largest selection of literature. It's all in one place. And that they are open this Sunday, which is August the 31st. They are also open on the holiday, Monday, September 1st. And of course, Sunday the 7th, which is the Sunday before school reopens, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So many of you are busy during the week, but Books and Office Supplies, they are open on those two Sundays, and of course on that Independence Day holiday on the Monday. So head down to Scarborough and gear up for your new school year at Books and Office Supplies.